The story of Obi-Wan Kenobi is not one of innate, effortless greatness, but rather a narrative of relentless self-forging. His journey to becoming the archetypal Jedi was paved with early insecurity and a profound need to prove his worth, making his ultimate ascension all the more remarkable. To understand the man he became, one must first examine the boy he was, a passionate and intense initiate within the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. Unlike the mythical prodigy Anakin Skywalker would later prove to be, Obi-Wan's connection to the Force was not an overwhelming river of power, but a disciplined stream, one he learned to channel through sheer force of will and dedication. His early years were marked by a palpable fear of failure, a driving anxiety that he would not be chosen as a Padawan and would be relegated to the Jedi Service Corps. This fear was not baseless. He possessed a core of simmering anger and a stubborn rigidity that several observant masters noted with concern. He was a student of the Jedi Code in the most literal sense, clinging to its tenets as a rigid framework to contain his own turbulent emotions. A stark contrast to the flexible, living interpretation his future master, Qui-Gon Jinn, would embody. The central defining relationship of Obi-Wan's formative years was, without question, with the maverick Jedi Qui-Gon Jinn. Their beginning was not one of instant kinship, but of stark rejection, an event that would psychologically shape Obi-Wan's entire path. When Qui-Gon first encountered the young initiate, he saw a reflection of a former fallen pupil, Xanatos, and he perceived in Obi-Wan the same potential for pride and anger. Qui-Gon's initial refusal to take him on was a devastating blow, a validation of Obi-Wan's deepest insecurities. This rejection, however, became the crucible in which his determination was tempered. It instilled in him a powerful, lifelong drive to not only become a Jedi, but to become the perfect Jedi, to master the code so completely that no one could ever doubt his commitment again. His entire identity became a project of meticulous construction in the image of the Jedi ideal, a conscious choice to walk the path rather than an effortless glide along it. Their eventual partnership, forged in the fires of shared crisis on the planet Bandamir, was built on a foundation of earned respect rather than easy affection. The mission to Bandamir, detailed in the Jedi Apprentice series, pitted them against Qui-Gon's fallen former apprentice, Xanatos, forcing master and prospective student into a tense alliance. During this trial, Qui-Gon began to see past the boy's intensity to his profound courage, his sharp intellect, and his unwavering loyalty. Obi-Wan, in turn, began to learn that the Force was not merely a set of rules to be memorized, but a living energy to be felt and trusted. Their dynamic solidified into that of a pragmatic, often distant father and a son perpetually striving for approval. Obi-Wan frequently found himself in the role of the cautious advisor, urging adherence to the Council's will and the strict letter of the law, while Qui-Gon followed his own instincts, his connection to the living Force guiding him down unorthodox paths. This tension was not animosity, but rather the friction that honed them both, with Obi-Wan providing a necessary anchor to Qui-Gon's visionary sails. This complex teacher-student relationship reached its brutal, tragic apex on the grassy plains of Naboo. The duel with the Sith Lord Darth Maul was a violent distillation of their entire partnership. Qui-Gon fought with a powerful, centered serenity, a master of the Ataru form, fully immersed in the moment. Obi-Wan, fighting alongside him, was fueled by a fierce, desperate need to protect his master, his actions driven by loyalty and love. When the energy gates sealed him off, trapping him behind the barrier and forcing him to watch Qui-Gon battle Maul alone, his fear was not for his own life, but for his master's. The moment Qui-Gon was run through by Maul's saber was the moment the Padawan died. What rose from that moment was not a calm Jedi knight, but a vessel of pure grief and rage. His famous leap over the Sith Lord, his swift retrieval of his master's lightsaber, And the decisive bisecting strike were not the actions of a detached peacekeeper. They were the acts of a son avenging his father. For a terrifying moment, he hovered on the precipice of the dark side, his lightsaber poised to strike down the defeated Maul, not in justice, but in vengeful fury. That he pulled back, that he chose to breathe and center himself despite the tsunami of his emotions, was his first true act as a Jedi Knight. His greatest victory was born from his most catastrophic personal failure. In accepting Qui-Gon Jinn's final wish to train the boy Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan shouldered a destiny far heavier than he felt ready for. He was knighted not in triumph, but in tragedy, and his first act was one of defiant promise to the brother he had lost, a vow that would forever chain his fate to the Skywalker name and the destiny of the entire galaxy. Knighting himself in the Yaleks, heat of grief and defiance on Naboo, Obi-Wan Kenobi immediately assumed a mantle for which he felt profoundly unready. The dying wish of Qui-Gon Jinn was not a gentle request, but a solemn charge, a vow that would define the rest of his life. To train the young, powerfully Force-sensitive boy from Tatooine, Anakin Skywalker was a responsibility that dwarfed any battlefield command or diplomatic mission. From the very first day, Obi-Wan was acutely aware that he was not the Master Anakin needed. He was the Master Anakin got. He was a man defined by discipline and control, now tasked with mentoring. A child who was a raw, emotional nexus of unprecedented power. The shadow of Qui-Gon loomed large over this new dynamic. Obi-Wan was constantly, sometimes painfully, aware that his methodical, code-adherent teaching style was the antithesis of the intuitive living Force approach Qui-Gon would have employed. This created an immediate and inherent tension. He was not trying to be himself. He was trying and failing to be the teacher he believed Qui-Gon would have been, all while suppressing his own grief. This internal conflict gave rise to a fundamental paradox in Obi-Wan's relationship with Anakin. Publicly, and in his own mind, he framed their bond as a fraternity. He famously called Anakin his brother, a designation that suggested equality and camaraderie. Yet in practice, Obi-Wan unconsciously and inevitably assumed the role of a father. He was the sole constant authority figure in the boy's life, the architect of his education, the enforcer of rules, and the source of both praise and discipline. He was the one who had to set boundaries for a child who had never known any, who had to temper rampant emotion with reason, and who had to instill a sense of duty in a boy prone to selfishness. This paternal dynamic was a natural outcome of their circumstances, but it was at odds with the Jedi Code strictures against attachment. Obi-Wan loved Anakin with a deep paternal fierceness, but he could never openly acknowledge the true nature of that love, even to himself. He had to mask it as the detached concern of a mentor, an impossible feat that forced him to constantly hold his genuine affection at arm's length. This emotional distance, this failure to bridge the gap between brother and father, would become a critical fault line. Obi-Wan's teaching methodology was a direct reflection of his own personality and his formative experiences. Having built himself into a Jedi through rigorous self-denial and studious application, he believed the same path was right for Anakin. He emphasized control, precision, and an intellectual understanding of the Force above intuitive leaps. He drilled forms and katas until they were perfect, taught strategy and negotiation, and constantly corrected Anakin's impulsive behavior. He was trying to sand down Anakin's rough edges, to fit a square peg of immense power into the round hole of Jedi tradition. He failed to see that in sanding away the edges, he was grinding away the very passion that was the source of Anakin's strength. His lessons were sound, but they were delivered from a place of intellectual rigor rather than emotional connection. He could teach Anakin how to wield a lightsaber with peerless skill, but he couldn't teach him how to manage the fear of loss that haunted his dreams. He provided discipline, but not the emotional vocabulary Anakin desperately needed. This is Ez. Not to say their relationship was devoid of warmth or success. The decade between The Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, chronicled in series like Jedi Quest, was also filled with genuine affection and shared triumph. They developed a witty, often sarcastic banter that was the hallmark of a deep, if complicated, bond. They traveled the galaxy together, and Obi-Wan took immense pride in Anakin's obvious talents and quick mind. He defended him fiercely before the Jedi Council, advocating for his advancement and believing wholeheartedly in the prophecy of the Chosen One. He saw the good, heroic man Anakin could become, and he dedicated his life to nurturing that potential. Yet, underlying every success was Obi-Wan's own deep-seated insecurity. Every act of rebellion from Anakin, every flash of anger, every dismissal of the rules, was internalized by Obi-Wan as a personal failure of instruction. He was not just training a Padawan, he was fulfilling the last wish of his beloved master. And the weight of that dual responsibility was a constant, crushing pressure. He was so focused on building the perfect Jedi that he sometimes failed to see the suffering boy right in front of him. A boy who needed a father's unconditional love far more than he needed a brother's competitive friendship or a master's critical approval. This foundational disconnect, born from a vow made in grief and executed with a love that dared not speak its name, set the stage for the tragedy to come. The outbreak of the Clone Wars marked a seismic shift for Obi-Wan Kenobi, transforming him from a peacekeeping knight into a military general. This transition was a profound violation of the Jedi ethos, a necessary compromise that every Jedi general had to rationalize. For Obi-Wan, the negotiator, it was a particularly bitter pill to swallow. The man who had built his reputation on resolving conflict through words and reason was now a key architect of a war of unprecedented scale and brutality. His brilliant strategic mind, once devoted to de-escalation, was now focused on troop deployments, orbital bombardments, and tactical offensives. The cognitive dissonance was a constant, low hum in the back of his consciousness, a price he willingly paid for the preservation of the Republic he had sworn to protect. He became a soldier, and a remarkably effective one. Alongside his newly knighted former Padawan, Anakin Skywalker, General Kenobi was a legend on the battlefield. Their partnership evolved into its most potent form during these war years. The teacher-student dynamic melted away, replaced by the seamless synergy of two brothers in arms who operated with a single mind. They were a devastating combination. Obi-Wan's flawless Soresu defense, forming an impenetrable shield that allowed Anakin's overwhelming Gemso offense to strike with the force of a thunderbolt. They developed intricate team-based lightsaber maneuvers, their trust in each other's abilities so absolute it was instinctual. On worlds like Jabium, Munilinst, and Christophsis, their names became synonymous with victory, a beacon of hope. For the Republic, this fraternity of war, however, was a double-edged lightsaber. The intense life-or-death experiences forged a bond between them that was deeper than it had ever been, yet it also papered over the lingering cracks in their foundation. They were comrades, they were heroes, but the underlying issues of Anakin's emotional instability and Obi-Wan's inability to address it directly were merely buried under the adrenaline and shared purpose of combat. The war provided Anakin with an outlet for his aggression and a validation of his power, but it did nothing to teach him inner peace. If anything, it rewarded his impulsiveness. Obi-Wan, for his part, was often too preoccupied with the immediate demands of strategy and survival to see the darkening shadows gathering within his friend. He celebrated the hero, but he missed the anguish of the man. Their legendary status also fostered a certain arrogance, a belief that they were an exception to the rules that governed other Jedi. This was most evident in their open disregard for the Council's directive against attachments. Their bond was their greatest strength, but it was also a vulnerability, a point of leverage that Chancellor Palpatine expertly identified and cultivated. The war also forced Obi-Wan into morally complex situations that further strained his relationship with Anakin. The most damaging of these was the mission that required him to fake his own death. At the Council's behest, Obi-Wan assumed the deep cover identity of the ruthless bounty hunter, Rocco Hardin, to infiltrate a plot against Chancellor Palpatine and get close to the Separatist leadership. The operation was a tactical masterpiece, a testament to Obi-Wan's skill and dedication. However, the personal cost was catastrophic. He was forced to deceive the entire galaxy, but the true injury was inflicted upon Anakin. Witnessing his master's apparent murder and attending his funeral plunged Anakin into a vortex of grief and rage from which he never fully emerged. When the truth was revealed, Anakin's sense of betrayal was absolute. He could not, or would not, see the strategic necessity. He only saw that his master, his brother, had lied to him, had caused him unimaginable pain for the sake of a mission. This event drove a deep wedge between them. It confirmed Anakin's growing belief that the Jedi Council, and by extension Obi-Wan, were capable of profound deception and were willing to sacrifice personal bonds for cold pragmatism. For Obi-Wan, it was another painful choice where duty to the Republic clashed with love for his family. He had chosen duty, as he always did, but the cost was a fundamental erosion of trust that Palpatine was all too happy to exploit. Amidst the chaos of war, Obi-Wan also faced a poignant reminder of the life he had chosen to forsake. His relationship with Duchess Satine Kryze of Mandalore was rekindled when he was assigned to protect her during the early days of the conflict. Their interactions were layered with a profound and tragic sense of what if. The love between them had not dimmed, it had matured into a deep, respectful affection. In a moment of stunning vulnerability, Obi-Wan confessed to her that had she asked him all those years ago, he would have left the Jedi Order to be with her. This admission is one of the most revealing in his entire life. It proves conclusively that the perfect Jedi was not a man without desire or attachment. He had loved deeply and passionately, and he had consciously chosen the Order over that love. His dedication was not a lack of alternative, but a continual reaffirmation of his vows. Satine's murder at the hands of Darth Maul later in the war was a devastating blow. It was the brutal annihilation of his last tangible connection to a different, peaceful future. Holding her as she died, his heart breaking yet still refusing to succumb to the dark side's promise of vengeful power, was the ultimate testament to his character. He accepted the pain as the price of his choice, a price he would pay again in a far more terrible fashion on the banks of a lava river. The war made Obi-Wan a general and a hero, but it also systematically isolated him, cutting away the people he loved most and leaving him alone with his duty, a duty that was leading the Jedi Order to its ruin. The final days of the Clone Wars represented the systematic dismantling of Obi-Wan Kenobi's entire world, a slow-motion catastrophe that culminated in absolute personal and professional ruin. The signs of Anakin's fall were there, visible, to anyone who cared to look past the heroics of the Chosen One. Yet Obi-Wan, along with the entire Jedi Council, remained willfully blind. His failure was not one of ignorance, but of a specific, tragic kind of love. He saw the darkness gathering in Anakin, the anger, the arrogance, the secretiveness. He felt the distance growing between them, a chasm he no longer knew how to bridge. But to confront it head-on, to truly voice his deepest fears, would have been to admit that the project of his life, the fulfillment of Qui-Gon's dying wish, was a catastrophic failure. He loved Anakin too much to see him as he was, instead clinging to the man he hoped he could still become. He offered gentle corrections, dry quips, and brotherly advice when what was needed was a direct, forceful intervention. He treated the symptoms while ignoring the metastasizing disease. His paternal love, the very thing that made him a good man, made him a flawed master. He could not bring himself to shatter the illusion of the heroic brother for the sake of saving the lost son. This failure was compounded by the Jedi Order's own hubris. Obi-Wan, now a respected member of the Council, was complicit in their final fateful mistake, asking Anakin to spy on Chancellor Palpatine. It was a request that violated every principle of trust and pushed a deeply conflicted, emotionally vulnerable man directly into the Sith Lord's waiting hands. Obi-Wan participated in this not out of malice, but out of a desperate, crumbling belief in the institution's authority. He was following orders, adhering to the chain of command, even as the foundation beneath it turned to sand. When he departed for the Battle of Utapau, his farewell to Anakin was telling. He said, "Goodbye, old friend." There was a finality to it, a melancholy sense that something was irrevocably broken, though he could not yet name it. He was still trying to be the brother, offering a jest about Anakin's teachings, utterly unaware that the man before him was already more than half lost to the dark side. The execution of Order 66 was not just a military defeat, it was a profound, intimate betrayal. For Obi-Wan on Utapau, it was the sudden, horrifying realization that the clones he had fought alongside, men he knew by name and considered comrades, had become his executioners. The trust he had placed in the Grand Army of the Republic, the institution he had served as a general, was revealed to be a lie. This galactic betrayal was immediately followed by a personal one of even greater magnitude. Accessing the Jedi Temple's security holograms, Obi-Wan was forced to witness the absolute annihilation of his faith. The recording showed not a Sith Lord attacking the temple, but his own brother, his beloved apprentice, leading the assault. The sight of Anakin, lightsaber blazing, cutting down Jedi, including younglings, was a psychic wound from which Obi-Wan would never fully recover. His world didn't just end, it inverted. The man he had loved as a son, had raised, had fought beside, was a monster. The hope of the galaxy was its destroyer. His famous heartbroken cry upon confirming the truth to Master Yoda, "Anakin is the father," is a sob of utter devastation. It is the sound of a man watching his entire life's purpose, his love and his faith, die at once. The subsequent duel on Mustafar was not a battle between a Jedi and a Sith Lord. It was a tragic familial murder. Obi-Wan went there not for vengeance, but for justice, and with a shattered, lingering hope that he could somehow stop his friend. The confrontation on the landing platform is a eulogy for their friendship. Obi-Wan's pleas are those of a grieving father. "I have failed you, Anakin. I was never able to teach you to think." He takes ownership of his failure, even as he confronts its horrifying result. Anakin's responses are pure, twisted hatred, the venom of a son who feels betrayed by the father who couldn't save him from himself. The duel itself is a perfect, brutal metaphor for their entire relationship. Anakin is all raw, explosive power, fueled by hate and pain, a physical manifestation of his unbridled emotions. Obi-Wan is defense, precision, and control, the embodiment of the discipline he had always tried to impart. He doesn't win by overpowering Vader. He wins by outthinking him, by using his former brother's arrogance and rage against him, just as he had always tried to temper it. His victory on the ledge is the most painful moment of his life. Standing over the burning, limbless wreck of Anakin Skywalker, he does not deliver a killing blow. His choice is one of love and grief, not Jedi doctrine. He cannot bring himself to kill the boy he still loves, so he leaves him to his fiery fate, a decision of mercy that would haunt the galaxy for decades. He takes Anakin's lightsaber, the symbol of his journey as a knight, and walks away, a man completely and utterly broken. He had fulfilled his duty as a Jedi, but in doing so, he had destroyed his family. The regret would be his constant companion, the ghost that would walk beside him into the desert, a reminder that his greatest failure was also his most heartbreaking act of love. The immediate aftermath of Mustafar was a state of catatonic shock for Obi-Wan Kenobi. Delivering the newborn Luke Skywalker to his family on Tatooine was not an act of hope, but the mechanical fulfillment of a final duty, the last item on a list of unbearable tasks. As he handed the child to Beru Whiteson, he was a ghost, his eyes hollow, his spirit extinguished. He had not just lost a war, he had presided over the death of everything he loved. The Republic, the Jedi Order, his friends, his master's legacy, and finally his brother and son, Anakin, all were ashes. His self-imposed exile on Tatooine was, in its initial phase, not a strategic retreat, but a surrender to despair. He chose Tatooine deliberately, the planet he loathed for its lawlessness and its association with Anakin's traumatic childhood, as his prison. He would punish himself by living every day in the crucible of his failure, watching over the son of the man he had maimed and left to die, while the empire his apprentice helped build reigned supreme. He was not Ben Kenobi, the wise hermit, not yet. He was simply a man drowning in regret. Each memory of Anakin's laughter, each shared victory, now a shard of glass in his heart. The early years of his exile, as detailed in the novel Kenobi, were a brutal adjustment to a new, crushing reality. The man of action was forced into absolute passivity. The negotiator had no one to talk to. The general who commanded armies was now a solitary figure in a dusty hut, his only company the twin sons and the scuttling womp rats. His internal monologue was a relentless tribunal of self-recrimination. He replayed every moment, every crossword, every missed opportunity for a deeper connection with Anakin. He questioned every lesson, every piece of advice. Had he been too strict? Not strict enough? Had he been too much of a brother when Anakin needed a father, or too much of a distant father when he needed a brother's unconditional loyalty? The question that haunted him most was the simplest and the most devastating. Could he have saved him? The memory of Mustafar was a waking nightmare. He would see the fire, smell the burning flesh, and hear his own voice pleading over the roar of the lava. He had left Anakin there. He had walked away. Was that the act of a Jedi, or the act of a man too heartbroken to finish what he had started? This guilt was a heavier burden than any he had carried during the war. His connection to the Force, once a vibrant and constant presence, became a source of profound pain. In the early days, he drew on it as little as possible, fearing that its use would act as a beacon to the Emperor and his new apprentice, Darth Vader. But his isolation went deeper than mere caution. The Force felt different. It felt stained, polluted by the darkness of the Purge and the screaming echoes of the slain. To reach out with his feelings was to feel the void where thousands of Jedi voices had once been. It was to feel the cold, mechanical malevolence of Vader, a sensation that was both alien and horrifyingly familiar. He felt his own power atrophy. From disuse and grief, his once sharp skills blunted by sand and sorrow. He was a musician who could no longer bear to hear music. Yet slowly, imperceptibly at first, the desert began its work on him. Tatooine, in its harsh, minimalist beauty, demanded a different kind of strength. There was no glory here, no strategy, no negotiation. There was only survival and a simple, stark honesty. Interacting with the moisture farmers, like the Lars family and other settlers, he was forced to engage with a world where the grand concepts of the Republic and the Jedi Order were meaningless. Their struggles were immediate, tangible: water, safety, family. This immersion in the mundane was a form of therapy. He couldn't hide behind the title of General or Jedi Master. He was just Ben. He helped where he could, in small, unseen ways, mediating disputes between settlers and Tusken Raiders, not as a negotiator, but as a neighbor. These small acts of kindness, divorced from any grand destiny or prophecy, began to reconnect him to the core of the Jedi Code, to its emphasis on selfless service and compassion. Stripped of the political baggage and martial pride that had corrupted the Order, the true turning point in his exile was his communication with the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn. Having learned the first steps of the path to immortality from his master, years before, Obi-Wan now, in the quiet of the desert, had the time and the desperate need to complete his training. Qui-Gon's voice, when it finally broke through his grief, was not one of recrimination or disappointment. It was one of guidance. His former master taught him to let go, not of his love for Anakin, but of the guilt that was poisoning it. He learned to release his attachment to the outcome, to accept that Anakin had made his choices, and that his own failures, while real, were not the sole cause of the tragedy. He learned to see the larger tapestry of the Force, to understand that his role was not over. This spiritual awakening did not erase his pain, but it gave him a framework to bear it. He moved from a state of active, debilitating grief to one of patient, watchful acceptance. His vigil over Luke was no longer a penance, it was a purpose. The love he had for the Father was transformed into a hope for the Son. The desert had purified him, burning away the General and the Jedi Master, leaving behind the hermit, the sage, and the guardian, a man who had finally found a peace that was not the absence of pain, but the mastery of it. He was ready now to wait. His complex relationship with Maul transcended the simple dichotomy of Jedi and Sith, evolving into a uniquely tragic bond of shared suffering and mirrored obsession. Maul was not merely an enemy. He was a phantom limb of Obi-Wan's past, a living embodiment of his greatest failures and losses. He was the weapon that killed Qui-Gon Jinn, the monster who murdered Satine Kryze, and a constant reminder of the Sith threat that had consumed his own apprentice. Their fates were inextricably linked across decades, their paths crossing in violence again and again, each confrontation layering more pain and history onto their connection. Maul's hatred for Obi-Wan was the sole purpose that sustained his ruined life, while Obi-Wan's need to stop Maul became a sacred duty to protect the fragile hope he guarded. Their final confrontation on Tatooine was not the epic clash of their youth, but a brief, somber, and profoundly intimate end to their shared saga. Maul, drawn by the faint hope of the Chosen One's return, sought Obi-Wan out not for conquest, but for answers, for a final point to his suffering. In a moment of chilling clarity, he deduced the truth Obi-Wan protected, that the boy he watched over was the key to the Sith's destruction. Their lightsabers ignited, and the duel was over in 3 precise moves, a testament to how well they knew each other after a lifetime of conflict. Obi-Wan, embodying the serene mastery of his exile, struck down his oldest foe not with anger, but with a swift, pitiful efficiency. In Maul's final moments, the hatred finally drained away, leaving only a broken creature facing his destiny. As Obi-Wan caught him, holding him in a tragic parody of how he had held Satine, Maul whispered his last words, "He will avenge us." In that moment, us meant both of them, the Jedi and the Sith, bound together in their shared tragedy and their common enemy in the Emperor. Obi-Wan looked upon the man who had caused him so much pain and felt not victory, but a profound and sorrowful completion. He had ended Maul's torment, fulfilling a final, unexpected duty to his most persistent enemy. This act of mercy, this quiet end to a lifetime of rage, was the ultimate expression of the peace Obi-Wan had found. He had not just defeated a Sith Lord, he had finally laid a ghost to rest, closing the last wound of his old life so he could fully devote himself to his new hope. The 2 decades of exile transformed Obi-Wan Kenobi from a broken soldier into a true sage, a process of spiritual alchemy as harsh and refining as the Tatooine deserts themselves. The man who emerged was not the same man who had entered the wasteland. The rigid adherence to the Jedi Code, which had once been a shield for his insecurities, had been melted down in the crucible of his grief and reforged into a deep, intuitive wisdom. He no longer saw the code as a set of rules to be obeyed, but as a set of principles to be lived, a distinction that had eluded the Jedi Order in its final days. His understanding of the Force deepened beyond the mechanical applications of telekinesis and combat. Through his communion with Qui-Gon Jinn's spirit, he learned to perceive its living current in a way he never had, even under his master's direct tutelage. He felt it in the relentless heat of the twin suns, in the patient resilience of the moisture vaporators, and in the simple, hard-won lives of the settlers. The Force was not just a power for Jedi. It was the fabric that bound this entire forgotten corner of the galaxy together. This connection was quiet, contemplative, and profoundly different from the vibrant, active bond he had known during the war. It was the difference between hearing a single, clear note and a grand, chaotic symphony. This newfound perspective allowed him to recontextualize his greatest failure, Anakin. His guilt never fully vanished, but it was no longer a crippling weight. He came to understand that Anakin's fall was the result of a perfect storm, a confluence of the Sith Lord's manipulation, the Jedi Order's failings, and Anakin's own choices. He accepted his part in the tragedy without allowing it to define him entirely. He could now remember the good man Anakin had been, the hero, without the memory being immediately overwritten by the monster he became. This was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a necessary detachment that allowed him to function, to hope, and to prepare for the future. His love for Anakin was purified of its possessive, paternal anxiety. It became a more selfless love, one that could be transferred to the son as a pure hope for redemption, not as a desperate attempt to correct the father's mistakes. When the moment finally arrived, when the astromech droid R2-D2 trundled into his life with a desperate message from a princess, Obi-Wan was not a relic shaken from slumber. He was a man who had been waiting for this day for 20 years. His meeting with Luke Skywalker was a meticulously orchestrated performance, a careful curation of truth designed to inspire a naive young man to action. Every word, every gesture was calculated. He spoke of Luke's father as a cunning warrior, a good friend, and a man murdered by the evil Darth Vader. This was the necessary myth. Obi-Wan understood that Luke, at this nascent stage of his journey, needed a heroic ideal to fight for, a legacy to reclaim. He could not be burdened with the devastating, complex truth of his father's corruption and his own master's role in it. The truth of Anakin's fate was a weapon too heavy for a boy. To lift, it would have broken him. So, Obi-Wan gave him a sword instead, his father's lightsaber, and the noble story that came with it. This was not a lie born of deceit, but of compassion and strategic genius. He was building a legend to serve a greater good. His role as a guide was that of the archetypal mentor, drawing on every lesson from his own life. He saw in Luke the same passion he had once seen in Anakin, but also a simpler, pure heart, unburdened by the cosmic weight of a prophecy. He saw the good-natured stubbornness of the Lars family and the innate, raw power that was his Skywalker birthright. His training of Luke was starkly different from his training of Anakin. There was no talk of politics or the intricacies of the Jedi Council. The lessons were elemental, foundational. The remote droid exercise in the Falcon was not about combat, but about faith, about learning to let go and trust something larger than oneself. It was the very lesson Anakin had never truly learned. When he spoke of the Force, it was not with the dogmatic certainty of the old order, but with the wonder of a true believer. It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together. This was the wisdom of Qui-Gon Jinn, filtered through 2 decades of meditation and loss. He was not creating a Jedi Knight in the old image. He was igniting the spark of a new hope, one that was simpler, more passionate, and more connected to the living heart of the Force than the corrupted institution he had once served. His final act aboard the Death Star was the ultimate synthesis of his entire life's journey. Confronting Darth Vader was not about victory in combat. He knew he could not win, nor was that his goal. He was there to provide a distraction, to buy time for Luke and the others to escape. The duel was a poignant echo of their past, but Obi-Wan fought without anger, without fear, and without regret. He was serene. He had looked upon the mechanized horror his brother had become and saw not an enemy to be defeated, but a tragedy to be transcended. His famous line, "If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine," was not a boast. It was a statement of fact, a calm revelation of the truth he had learned in the desert. By allowing Vader to strike him down, he accomplished what he could not have in physical victory. He transformed himself from an old man into an eternal symbol. He became a guiding voice in Luke's ear, a constant reminder of the light, and a permanent part of the Force itself. In that final moment, the student of Qui-Gon Jinn finally completed his training. Achieving a state of being his master had only begun to discover. The negotiator had negotiated the terms of his own death, and in doing so, secured the future he had failed to protect a generation before. Obi-Wan Kenobi's legacy is defined not by his martial prowess or strategic genius, but by an unbreakable commitment to light that remained steadfast against a tide of unparalleled personal suffering. He endured the brutal loss of his master, the burden of training the volatile Chosen One, the death of his great love Satine Kryze, and the ultimate betrayal and mutilation of his own apprentice, Anakin. Any one of these tragedies could have justified a turn toward the dark side's seductive promise of power over pain. Yet, Obi-Wan never faltered, not because he felt nothing, but because he mastered everything he felt. His strength lay in choosing to feel the full depth of his grief, love, and guilt without letting them consume him. He understood that the dark side does not save you from pain. It only hollows you out. In the end, Obi-Wan's true power was his refusal to trade his compassion for control or his sorrow for rage. Where Anakin fell by seeking power to prevent his nightmares, Obi-Wan found strength by walking through his nightmares, without ever losing sight of the light. His life stands as the ultimate testament to a Jedi's ideals, a profound lesson that true strength is not the absence of suffering, but the courage to face it without corruption. He became a beacon, not because he was flawless, but because Obi-Wan Kenobi was unbreakable. Thank you for watching.